At America's most sacred shrine, a Tomb Sentinel stood motionless, a statue of pure discipline. But when a gang of punks swarmed an old war hero for his medals, the silent guard faced a choice that would shatter protocol and ignite a nation. The August sun beat down on Liberty National Cemetery, a merciless hammer forging waves of heat that shimmered above the polished granite walkways. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of cut grass and old stone, the silence broken only by the rhythmic click of cicadas and the distant, reverent whispers of tourists. Here, amidst endless rows of pristine white headstones, Sentinel Leo Corbin stood watch over the tomb of the unknown soldier. At 30, his face was a mask of stoic discipline, his ice-blue eyes concealed behind regulation sunglasses, his jaw set like granite. His movements were a testament to absolute precision, a sacred cadence honed over 3 years of unwavering duty. 21 steps south. A crisp, 90-degree turn, his polished boots striking the stone as one. A 21-second pause, motionless, facing the tomb. Another turn, 21 steps north. It was a living tribute, a ritual of honor that connected him to a legacy of sacrifice he felt deep in his bones. It was the same legacy his grandfather, a veteran of the frozen hills of Korea, had instilled in him, a legacy not of glory, but of quiet, unbreakable duty. Near the edge of the plaza, a figure stood apart from the clusters of visitors. Arthur Pendleton was a man out of time, his posture slightly stooped with age, but radiating an undeniable dignity. He wore a classic tweed blazer despite the heat, a well-preserved fedora casting a shadow over his deeply lined face. In his hand, he held a polished oak cane with a brass lion's head handle, its base tapping softly on the granite. Pinned to his lapel was a row of medals, muted silver and bronze, that caught the harsh sunlight. Among them, one stood out, the deep, solemn purple of a Purple Heart. Leo's gaze lingered on it for a fraction of a second. His grandfather had one just like it, tucked away in a cedar box, a silent story of a battle fought and survived. Arthur's eyes were fixed on the marble sarcophagus, lost in a past only he could see. He came here not for accolades, but for communion with ghosts, with friends who never returned from the jungles of Vietnam. Leo recognized the look. It was a profound, silent respect that mirrored his own. But that respect was not universal. Lounging near a low stone wall, four men stood out like a blight on the hallowed ground. Their postures were insolent, their voices a low, jagged murmur that grated against the serene atmosphere. The leader, a man with cold, predatory eyes and a spiderweb tattoo crawling up his neck, watched Arthur with a cruel smirk. His name was Marco Diaz, though he preferred the moniker Razor. Flanking him were his crew, a wiry, nervous man called Twitch, a broad-shouldered brute known as Brick, and a younger, hesitant follower they simply called Kid. They wore torn jeans and faded band shirts, their presence an open act of defiance in this place of reverence. Leo's grip on his M14 rifle tightened imperceptibly. His training screamed at him to maintain focus, to let nothing break his rhythm. The world outside his 21 steps did not exist. But his instincts, honed by years in the military before joining this elite unit, screamed a different warning. These men weren't here to pay their respects. Their eyes, hungry and sharp, were fixed on one thing: the glint of metals on an old man's chest. A storm was gathering over this sacred ground, and Leo felt the first cold drops of an unavoidable conflict. The first verbal assault cut through the air like a thrown rock. "Hey, Pops," Marco called out, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He and his crew sauntered over, closing the distance to Arthur. "Those tin things real? Or you pick 'em up at a pawn shop?" Arthur turned slowly, his gaze calm and steady, betraying no fear. "They're real," he said, his voice a low, gravelly tone that carried the weight of decades. "Earned them in a place you've only seen in movies." Marco's crew snickered. "A war hero, huh?" Twitch added, his eyes darting nervously between Arthur and the silent sentinel in the distance. "Bet you were a cook." peeling potatoes while the real men fought. The insult hung in the humid air. A few nearby tourists paused, their faces shifting from curiosity to concern. A young mother instinctively pulled her child closer, shielding him from the ugly scene. Another man, standing with his teenage son, subtly angled his body, ready to intervene if needed. He caught Leo's eye for a brief moment, a silent question passing between them. Leo's expression remained unchanged, but behind the sunglasses, his focus was absolute. Arthur's hand rested on the lion's head of his cane. "It doesn't matter what I did," he said evenly. "What matters is that we served. Something you boys know nothing about." The calm defiance only seemed to fuel Marco's aggression. He stepped closer, invading Arthur's personal space. "Maybe we don't, but I know value when I see it." His eyes locked onto the purple heart. "That one looks special. I'm a collector, you know." Then Twitch, emboldened by his leader, did the unthinkable. He reached out a grimy finger and flicked the purple heart. The small, metallic tink was an explosion in the hallowed silence. It was an act of profound disrespect, a desecration of everything the metal symbolized. Arthur's demeanor changed in an instant. The weary calm in his eyes hardened into cold steel. His hand, frail but steady, covered the metals protectively. "Don't," he warned, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more menace than all of Marco's shouted taunts. "Touch them." Again, Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "Protocol is absolute. The mission is the tomb. Do not deviate." The words of his training manual echoed in his mind, but they were drowned out by the memory of his grandfather's voice. "Honor, Leo, isn't a monument of stone. It's something you defend every single day." The flicking of that metal was not just an insult to Arthur Pendleton. It was an attack on every soldier, living and dead, who had ever bled for their country. The scales in Leo's mind were tipping, and the weight of protocol was beginning to feel terrifyingly light. Marco laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that drew more stares. "Or what, old man? You gonna hit me with your walking stick?" He looked back at his crew, playing to his audience. "Watch this." With a sudden, brutal shove, he pushed his palm hard against Arthur's shoulder. The old veteran caught off balance, stumbled backward. His oak cane scraped loudly against the granite, a piercing shriek of protest. Arthur caught himself just before falling, his face pale with shock and indignation. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman cried out, "Stop it! Someone do something!" That was it. The final line had been crossed. In Leo's mind, the debate was over. Protocol be damned. In one fluid, decisive motion, Leo Corbin broke formation. His 21-step count vanished. His polished boot came down not in its designated spot, but in a powerful stride directly toward the confrontation. The rhythmic clicking that had been the cemetery's heartbeat stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute. Every head turned. Tourist staff, even a bird seemed to hold their breath. A Tomb Sentinel was off his mat. The unthinkable was happening. "Step away from him," Leo commanded. His voice wasn't a shout, but a sharp, clear order that sliced through the tension. It was the voice of a man accustomed to instant obedience. Marco and his crew froze, startled by the sudden appearance of the immaculate, imposing figure. Marco's sneer faltered for a second before he puffed out his chest. "You talking to me, soldier boy? Your job is to march back and forth like a toy. Go play." He made a fatal mistake. He turned his back on Leo and reached for Arthur's medals again. Leo moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man who had been a statue moments before. He closed the remaining distance in 2 strides. His gloved hand shot out and clamped down on Marco's wrist just as his fingers brushed the purple heart. The grip was like iron. Marco cried out in pain and surprise, trying to wrench his arm free. "I said," Leo repeated, his voice low and dangerously calm, "step away." He applied a subtle twist to Marco's wrist, a controlled move that forced the larger man to his knees. "Get him!" Brick roared, charging forward like a bull. Leo released Marco and pivoted seamlessly. He didn't meet Brick's clumsy charge with force, but with grace. He sidestepped, using the man's own momentum against him, and a precisely aimed palm heel strike to a pressure point in Brick's shoulder sent him stumbling sideways in a twitch. The two collapsed in a heap. The last one kid just stood there, his eyes wide with terror, hands raised in surrender. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. It was not a brawl. It was a demonstration of absolute control. Leo stood over the groaning Marco, his M14 held at a perfect port arms, his posture once again immaculate. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He hadn't needed to. "It's over," Leo stated, his ice blue eyes now visible as he looked down at the defeated thug. "Leave. Now." Marco, clutching his wrist, scrambled to his feet, his bravado utterly shattered. He spat on the ground, shot Leo a look of pure venom, and herded his crew away. They limped off, disappearing into the crowd that was now erupting in spontaneous, relieved applause. The applause was a strange, foreign sound in the sacred quiet of the plaza. Leo ignored it, his attention focused solely on the man he had sworn to protect. He stepped to Arthur's side, his expression softening from stone to concern. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice returning to a respectful, quiet tone. Arthur took a moment to steady his breathing, his hand still trembling slightly as it rested on his medals. He looked from the retreating forms of the punks to the young sentinel before him. A slow, grateful smile spread across his face. "Thanks to you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've faced down worse, but I'm not as young as I used to be." "They had no right," Leo said, his jaw tight with residual anger. "This place, your service, it's sacred. Some people don't see anything as sacred anymore," Arthur replied, his gaze drifting back to the tomb. "They only see what they can take." Before Leo could respond, another sentinel approached at a brisk pace, his face grim and urgent. He snapped a salute. "Sentinel Corbin, Major Vance wants to see you. Immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Leo's spine straightened, his military bearing returning instantly. "Understood." He turned back to Arthur, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Will you be all right here, sir?" Arthur nodded, his smile returning, this time with a hint of reassurance. "Go on, son. You did what you had to do. Don't you worry about me." He straightened his tweed jacket and adjusted his fedora. "Go face the music. A man who stands for something has nothing to fear." The words gave Leo a surge of strength. He gave Arthur a firm, respectful nod. As he followed the other guard toward the administrative building, he glanced back. He saw Marco, being handcuffed by cemetery police who had just arrived, glaring at him over the crowd. It wasn't just anger in the man's eyes. It was a promise of trouble that, for now, had been contained. Leo turned away, his focus shifting to the new battle that lay ahead, one that would be fought not with physical skill, but with words and principles in the office of Major Elena Vance. He had broken the most sacred rule of the Tomb Guard. Now, he had to answer for it. Major Elena Vance's office was as severe and orderly as the woman herself. Polished wood, framed commendations arranged with geometric precision, and a large American flag standing in the corner. She sat behind a large mahogany desk, her sharp, intelligent eyes studying Leo as he stood at perfect attention before her. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. With a tap of her finger, she turned a large monitor on her desk to face him. It was already playing a cell phone video, shaky but clear, of the entire incident. It showed the taunts, the shove, and Leo's swift, decisive intervention. The video ended, and the silence in the room was heavy. "You broke formation, Sentinel," she said, her voice calm, measured, and as hard as steel. "You abandoned your post. You are aware that there is no greater violation of our protocol. Explain yourself." Leo met her gaze without flinching. "Ma'am," he began, his voice steady. A civilian, a decorated combat veteran, was under physical assault on federal property. The aggressors were attempting to steal his medals, including a Purple Heart. My assessment was that he was in immediate danger. "Your assessment is irrelevant," Vance countered, though a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. "Your duty is to the tomb. Your purpose is to be a symbol of unwavering discipline." The world sees that video, and they see a Sentinel abandoning his post. You have risked the reputation of this unit, a reputation built over a century of flawless service. Respectfully, ma'am, I believe I upheld that reputation, Leo replied, his conviction unwavering. The Tomb Guard Creed states that we serve with dignity and perseverance. It speaks of honor. I did not believe I could honor the soldiers in that tomb by standing by while one of their brothers was being dishonored right in front of it. Following protocol in that moment would have been a greater failure of my duty. He let his words sink in. He had quoted their own creed back to her, framing his actions not as a violation, but as a deeper fulfillment of his oath. Major Vance leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled before her. She was silent for a full minute, her eyes boring into him, searching for any sign of doubt or weakness. She found none. Leo had made his choice, and he stood by it, ready to accept any consequence. Finally, she sighed, a barely audible sound of resignation. The incident is under official review. The Secretary of the Army's office has already been briefed. You are suspended from guard duty, pending the outcome of that review. Yes, ma'am, Leo said, his tone resolute. He saluted crisply and turned to leave. His career as a Tomb Sentinel was likely over. He had known that the moment he stepped off the mat. Corbin, Vance's voice stopped him at the door. He turned back. Her severe expression had softened almost imperceptibly. The rules are in place for a reason, she said quietly, almost to herself. They protect the symbol. But sometimes, the symbol has to be protected by a man. She looked directly at him. Off the record, you made me proud to wear this uniform today. Now, get out of my office. Leo allowed himself a small, almost invisible nod of acknowledgement. He exited the office, the weight of the official reprimand on his shoulders, but his spirit was lifted by her final words. He had done the right thing. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The story exploded online. The tourist video went viral, and within hours, the Sentinel of Arlington, a misnomer, but it stuck, was a national hero. News outlets picked up the story, not as a breach of protocol, but as an act of profound honor. Veterans groups across the country issued statements of support for Leo. The public outcry was overwhelming and unanimous. Leo Corbin was not a rule breaker. He was a hero who had upheld the very values he was sworn to represent. The official review concluded with unprecedented speed. A week later, Leo was called back to Major Vance's office. The atmosphere was entirely different. The Secretary's office has made its decision, she said, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. Your suspension is lifted. Furthermore, you are to be awarded the Army Commendation Medal for your exceptional conduct in the defense of a fellow veteran and the upholding of the highest traditions of military service. The following Saturday, a special ceremony was held on the plaza in front of the tomb. The crowd was enormous, a sea of supportive faces, veterans in their service caps, families, and news cameras. Leo stood on a temporary platform, his uniform immaculate, as Major Vance pinned the medal to his chest. Sentinel Corbin's actions, she announced to the crowd, her voice ringing with pride, remind us that discipline and duty are not merely about following orders. They're about understanding the spirit behind those orders. He protected more than a man that day. He protected the honor of all who have served. They had another guest of honor. Arthur Pendleton was invited onto the stage, his tweed jacket gleaming with his own medals. The community had presented him with a special citation for his courage and dignity. He moved slowly to the podium, his old eyes shining. At my age, you don't expect to find yourself in another fight, he said, a light chuckle in his voice. But Sentinel Corbin reminded me, and all of us, that the brotherhood of service never ends. He didn't just protect me. He stood guard for all of us. He turned to Leo, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, son. You are a credit to the uniform. After the ceremony, as the crowds dispersed, the two men stood together for a moment. Back to the mat tomorrow, I presume? Arthur asked with a smile. Leo nodded. That's the job, sir. To stand watch. And you do it better than anyone, Arthur said, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. They shook hands, a firm, unspoken bond of mutual respect passing between the young sentinel and the old warrior. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the cemetery, Leo Corbin returned to his post. He stood tall, the new medal a quiet gleam on his chest. As the clock struck the hour, he began his patrol. 21 steps. Turn. Pause. The rhythm was the same, but the man was not. He was no longer just a symbol of discipline carved from stone. He was a living guardian, a man who had proven that true honor requires not just a steady gait, but a steady heart, ready to act when it matters most. What do you think of Leo's decision? Should rigid protocol ever be broken for a higher moral duty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of courage moved you, please give a thumbs up, share it with someone who believes in doing the right thing, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the best of humanity. Always remember to comment respect for all our veterans. Thanks for watching.